Hello, my name's Galena. I'm the fiancé of Joshua Lee McCollister, who was murdered on July 8th by Deunn Willis and robbed by Danielle Durand. When I was in Humboldt County this last time, like I said before, I spent a lot of time with Sunny and Bessie, Josh's friends, and they were so wonderful to me. Just so incredibly wonderful. You know, I was so happy that Josh became friends with these people because his whole life he hadn't had an autism crowd, and Josh was just epically and so beautifully autistic. You know, there were people that were in Fort Bragg that were around him for like 10 minutes that worked with autistics, and you know, he'd leave the room, they'd say, "Is he autistic?" It's like, yes he is, yes he is. And yet he'd never had an autism crowd to hang out with. And it meant so much to me that at the end of his life he had a crowd of autistics to be hanging out with. I could see them having such fun together, you know, Bessie in particular. Like, I could have picked Bessie out of a crowd and said, that person and Josh are going to be friends. I guarantee it, you know. And that's actually kind of, I think, how they became friends. It's like they saw each other as fellow autistics and like, yep, I'm your friend. Yeah, I'm your friend too. And that was just great to see that Josh had that at the end. People that he felt understood by. Now, Sunny is one of those kind of people that that really helps others, does a lot for the community. And Josh had decided that Sunny was going to help advocate for him, help him get services. Because Josh was diagnosed with autism as a minor, but he didn't have any of the records to prove it. You know, this is something that if you're autistic and an adult can be a real challenge. That, you know you're autistic, but it's just very hard to get a re-diagnosis as an adult. You need to be diagnosed as a kid in order to be taken seriously. And Josh didn't remember the name of the doctor that had diagnosed him or anything like that. You know, he'd been a nonverbal child, and yet he had nothing to back it up, to prove it. So he needed help, and Sunny was helping him. And while I was hanging out with him, I was really so grateful to hear of all the help that Sunny had given Josh, all the kindness, all the support. Like, they'll never know just how much it meant to me. Everything they did for him. But as the conversation throughout the day just went on, I started to understand there was also kind of a darker side to some of the things that Josh had conveyed. See, Josh was so smart. Because he had rapid speech and because he'd, have communication problems and he'd melt down and things like that, most people didn't understand just how incredibly smart he was. You know, I did. Like, immediately. His intelligence was just like this beautiful bright light shining, and I just like, ooh, because I'm a sapiosexual is the word that Josh and I called ourselves. You know, we were both really attracted to intelligence. It's the thing that Josh valued in a woman more than anything else was intelligence. I knew how smart he was, and because Josh really didn't believe he had very long to live, before he died, he had started making preparations. I didn't understand until after he was dead, just how sure he was that he was going to die soon. I found out after he died that he actually made a lot of phone calls to people. Final farewell phone calls. That's how sure he was that he was going to be murdered by the stalking situation in Mendocino County. He had told me that he thought that the people who were stalking us in Mendocino County had connections up in Humboldt County. That's why I was so shocked that Deunn Willis and Danielle Durand did this to him, because, you know, we were undergoing so much cruelty, so much violence from this other situation. I just couldn't believe that something completely and totally random happened. Like his parents, they're both still in shock that something completely random happened, because Josh had just accepted that the stalking situation was going to get him. And the instigator even told me afterwards that he had predicted that Josh would be dead by July 10th. Josh died on July 8th. But Josh did foresee his death, and he was making these final phone calls to a lot of people, an awful lot of people that he'd never even spoken to on the phone before. He was having long conversations with these people, making preparations, because, see, Josh had a terrible backstory. It's just horrific. You know, I'm the daughter of a prolific serial killer. Josh is the only person that I have ever met in my life who has a story on par with mine. And he had decided, when we went out to that murder cabin in Comsky together, that he wanted his story told. He knew that with his communication problems, he couldn't do it. And he asked me to do it for him. And I promised him that I would. I promised him that I would tell his story, what had happened to him, what he'd seen when he was a kid. When he knew he was going to die, those last few weeks, it became very apparent to me when I was talking to his friends in Humboldt County that he had also decided that he wanted Sonny to help advocate for him after he was dead. And Sonny didn't realize this. You know, I guess Sonny just figured that he talked about the stuff they talked about with them with people, and he didn't. He did not share this information with people. And I was so glad that he had chosen someone to help advocate for him, but it also just, it really hit home to me how incredibly trapped he felt up there. That he knew death was coming for him and there's nothing he could do about it. You know, he and I had a phrase regarding my father being a serial killer. You know, we'd say, we have to finish the mission. The mission is important. The mission matters. And the things that he was telling Sonny up there, this was essentially him being devoted to finishing the mission. And I'm so glad that he met somebody up there that he could, in his way, ask to help him with that. I'm so glad that he met this person. These people, I'm so glad that he met them and bonded with them, and he trusted his story to them. It was just so freaking horrible. Though, you know, there's no way he could have predicted Deunn Willis. There's no way he could have predicted Danielle Durand, because, you know, you can't predict someone's going to shoot you over a puppy. That's so weird. I mean, I've never heard of a case like this before. And they didn't shoot him over the puppy is the thing. You know, they had the puppy. They could have just left. They shot him, or Deunn Willis shot him. I have to be technical about this. Deunn Willis shot him after the puppy was already in their possession. You know, every night when I go to bed and I think about what happened to Josh, I think, these people, this is not normal. Like, even in, like, when he gets to prison, because he is going to wind up in prison. They both are going to wind up in prison. I can't imagine how it's going to be like for them when the other inmates say, so what are you in here for? I shot a guy over a puppy. Can you imagine being their cellmate? Really? Like, I shot somebody over, like, a drug heist or, like, I don't know, something normal. Luring an autistic man with a free puppy on NextDoor is just, it's weird. It's just weird. There's something, I'm not a professional, but I just feel there is something deeply psychologically wrong with these two people, that they did this. This is not normal. He couldn't have predicted them. No one could. It hurts me so badly to know that he felt like there's nothing he could do to get away from being murdered. And every time I talk to someone who Josh made one of these final farewell phone calls to, it hurts so bad because so much of the time they have something that they said to me on the phone, that some message that they don't understand that I do. He passed on so many little cryptic messages for me or for his parents. Other people wouldn't understand this stuff. And it's so hard that it's like 2 months since he was killed, more than 2 months. And there's still little bits of information to be found out, because he was just so sure he was going to die, and he wanted his story told. You know, there's a bad thing that I was determined was not going to happen to one of my kids, and Josh was so determined that it was not going to happen. Now it looks like it very well might happen, because I can't prevent it without Josh. And I said to his mom, he'd be so disappointed. I feel like I'd failed him and let him down. And she said, oh honey, he's so proud of you. I said, you think so, Mama? She said, I know so. Because I'm making sure Josh's story is getting told. You know, Deunn Willis did his best to make sure that never happens. Danielle Durand did her best. But Josh also did his best. And I knew that when I was talking to Sonny. Josh did his best at the end to make sure that the mission was going to be finished. Because as he saw it, his story was not about him. Just like my story with my dad, it's not about me. There's a bigger picture here. The victims are what matters. And Josh really wanted the bigger picture to be fulfilled. He chose me to speak for him, and he chose someone up there to speak for him too. And I hate that he had to do that. But I'm so grateful that he found someone that he could trust his story to.